This week, we're talking monthly trade data and the jobs report. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Meghan Grebner. With us, as always, is University of Missouri Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Coming up, we'll dig into the details of this week's report. But first, let's recap what happened in this holiday shortened week in the markets.
Yeah, so not a lot of movement this week, Megan, just given that it was the 4th of July holiday. But if we start on the cattle side, we'll call cash fed cattle down 50 cents this week. That's on still pretty extremely light volume at this point. The feeder cattle markets this week mostly were closed, so no real test on feeder cattle sales this week. On the future side, the August live cattle futures contract was up $1.05. And the August feeder cattle contract was up to $2.25. Choice box beef was higher this week, $6.25 higher. That now puts them right at $3.30. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts up a modest 20 cents this week. The August lean hog futures contract was down 45, and we lost $1.75 on the pork cutout value.
Scott, we always talk about that summer seasonal grilling demand. Now that we've passed the July 4th holiday and we start to kind of wind down our summer months, does that impact what happens when we think about domestic demand and then what's happening a little bit in the markets as well?
Well, we certainly get our strongest demand as we've kind of rolled through the last 4 weeks or so here, and it will continue to trail off seasonally relative to what we normally see. So it's not surprising. I'll say it's amazing when you look at the choice box beef price this week. All those components were up again this week, so pretty strong demand, and we're sitting at $3.30, $8 higher than we were last year. Got still some pretty strong demand against short supply, of course.
Slaughter obviously shortened or less this week. Let's talk a little bit about how things look in terms of the weekly slaughter numbers.
Yeah, so USDA tells us for the week ending July 6th, we're going to end up with a run of 517,000 head of cattle this week. That is 92,000 head less than a week ago, and all because of just slower runs with the holiday week. It's 19,000 head less than what we did last year. And on the hog side, a run of 2.045 million head this week in terms of hog slaughter. That's down 376,000 head relative to last week, but up 91,000 head from what we did same week a year ago.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about that year-to-date cattle and hog slaughter as well.
Yeah, so cattle slaughter year-to-date down 4.5%. And when you look at the hog side, hog slaughter is up 1.1%.
I'm not a big report out this week. I'm going to call it the big report out this week, monthly trade data. As you take a look at the month of May, let's talk a little bit about beef exports and how they're running compared to where we were a year ago.
Yeah, so we got May 2024 beef exports at 259 million pounds for May of 2024. That is 2.9% lower than where we were a year ago. When you look at places we were down, China down, South Korea down. Actually, a combination of Mexico and Canada was also down this month as well. So less trade. Year to date, we're down 4.9%, about 65 million pounds less beef has left the United States year to date this year relative to last.
On the flip side of that, I don't think we can get out of here without talking about imports. As you take a look at beef imports for May, what do you notice about that number?
Yeah, so we keep importing more lean ground beef into the United States. 344 million pounds of beef imports in May of this year. That's 10.4% above where we were May a year ago. And when you look at year to date, 304 million pounds more beef imports this year relative to last. It's another way to help supplement what's been less domestic production or at least domestic slaughter thus far, because imports year to date up 19.5%.
Are you concerned to see the import number in comparison to what we're looking at for exports?
So I don't know if I'm concerned with that number. So it's not surprising. Strong dollar, high beef prices, enticing more product to come into the United States. Not quite as strong a pull for product to move out of the United States. You've got some other countries like Australia trying to get back into some markets that they would have lost back when they had dry weather. So I don't think all of that is unanticipated. And again, it's just an opportunity for supply and demand to become in better balance. And let's not forget those beef imports tend to supplement nicely what might be some extra fat that we have from heavy carcasses we're producing here. So that lean ground beef coming in is certainly helpful to the overall picture as well.
I think an interesting month, specifically looking at pork exports as well.
Yeah, so although we've been running above a year ago for several months, for May of 2024, 585 million pounds of pork exports out of the United States was actually down 5.7% relative to May of 2023. We're still up year to date. We're up 6% year to date in terms of pork exports. So we've typically talked about both Mexico being one of those markets that have been really strong for us. Combination of Mexico and Canada down 18 million pounds, I think led to what was lower pork exports out of the United States. We continue to see China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, the combination of those three countries also lower. They were down about 26 million pounds.
It'll definitely be interesting to see what happens next month in terms of exports, specifically thinking about Mexico, knowing that the hurricane coming in and the potential to, with so much product that we send down to Mexico, and what happens in terms of tropical storm season and what's going on there right now specifically.
So we certainly want some strength here for the remainder of 2024 as well as we think about prices. We've been sideways for quite a while here on pork prices, and be nice to see some stronger movement to Mexico again.
Let's take a look. Jobs report out this week from Bureau of Labor Statistics, slightly above pre-report expectations. I would assume that's good news overall.
Yeah, it depends on which side of the coin you want to look at this week, Megan. But 206,000 jobs added. That's a little above the 195,000 pre-report estimate that was out there. So it's not a big increase relative to what folks were estimating. Unemployment did nudge up to 4.1%. But I really think maybe the big news here was just hourly pay. So it was up 10 cents, but year over year increase now up 3.9. So it's been moving lower. Well, that 3.9% annual increase is the lowest we've seen since mid 2021.
That's really all all I have for you this week. Kind of a slow, maybe a little bit of a snoozer of a week in terms of what's been happening, just because of that midweek holiday, which I think makes life a little bit more interesting in terms of markets. As we get ready for next week, we've got retail prices, supply and demand, consumer sentiment. What are some of the things you're watching specifically on that supply and demand side of things?
So I'm turning my attention to what's happening in feed prices. When you see what's happening or what has happened on the corn side, where we've seen for a while, we were trying to move back below $4 again on nearby futures for corn. That and we see weather. Yes, it's been too wet in some places, and we likely have some issues with flooding that's going to reduce harvested area. What USDA begins to tell us, July is a little early for them. They don't tend to do a lot of this until August, but beginning to get a bead on what crops look like. Maybe it's time to do some risk management on the feed cost side. You and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago when we got the acreage report, but I think this is another time to really think hard before we get the July WASI report from USDA. For me, the other big one comes on cattle. Just what are they saying about beef production in 2025? We talked about a big cut in production here in 2024, and as carcass weights have stayed heavy, we're certainly not getting as big a cut as we would have thought earlier. And so, what's USDA do? And do they keep pushing prices higher on the cattle side? Those to me are the big things we get to watch with next week's report. And we're back to a full bore week of market information. So more to talk about next week.
And I think it goes, maybe we should say it again. Obviously, at this point, there's no hope that there's a July cattle inventory. And when we're talking about beef production for 2025 specifically, how much comes into play as we're thinking about us not knowing whether we're holding heifers back and those animals not entering into the production and the food supply chain?
Yeah. So we certainly lack that information. I was doing a little bit of work just looking at beef cow slaughter for the first 6 months of this year relative to beginning cow inventory, and then just the percentage of heifers on feed April 1, looking historically at how well those two things predicted the July 1 cattle report. Could explain about 75% of the variability with just those two factors, which sometimes I say that's good. Other times I say, well, we're missing 25% of the variability. But that kind of approach would have suggested July cattle inventory report down 1.7%. We started the year down 2.4. Not going to be surprised for us to have slowed the decline, which is all that 1.7% down would suggest. It doesn't suggest we're building. So maybe that gives us a little bit of framework of watching. I think a lot of the other factors are also positive. So perhaps that 1.7 down is too pessimistic, given pasture, hay, et cetera, that seems to be in a much better place than we were last year.
Scott, it's always great to see you.
Have a great weekend, Megan.
You too. To have our weekly livestock market update delivered your email box every Saturday morning, go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments. And for a rundown of what's happening every day in the markets, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Meghan Grebner for Brownfield.